In today's lesson, we'll be talking about Ruth. Now, it's really best to read the entire book of Ruth so that you can get a good understanding of Ruth's story. But I'll start with a bit of biblical history. Naomi had lost her 2 sons, and so she was left with her 2 daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth. Orpah decided to leave Naomi in Bethlehem and went back to be with her family. And this was perfectly fine because Naomi was too old to bear any more sons. And so Naomi released both Ruth and Orpah to live their lives as they would. However, Ruth decided not to abandon Naomi in spite of the likely hardships that they would face as being widowed women. In these days, Naomi and Ruth would have likely became beggars because they would have no means to provide for themselves. However, Ruth was willing to accept a difficult journey so as not to abandon Naomi in her time of need, even though Naomi again had granted her permission to leave. We have to be careful not to miss the cues from God, admonishing us to help someone who may be saying that they don't need the help. So sometimes we might need to pray for someone who refuses our help, or maybe we can't pray for them openly because they say they don't need the help, but maybe we're going before God in our secret closets on behalf of someone that God has placed on our hearts. Part of God's plan may be a tremendous spiritual blessing for you, just as we see as Ruth's story continues. Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi put her on a path to fulfill the will of God in a way that she likely could have never imagined. The nation of Israel at this time had a tradition where if a woman had lost her husband without having given birth to a male son, the closest male relative to her husband would have the opportunity to marry her and provide her with a son so that the family's name could be carried on. So when Ruth went to reap in a particular field, she met Boaz, who was of the Elimelech family, just as her husband was, which made him a candidate for Ruth to marry. So again, all part of God's plan. He's working things out in spite of our confusion and in spite of our unknowing in our own actions. We're just moving along as the Spirit of God gives us the guidance, and all the while God is setting us up, just as he was doing for Ruth. Boaz was a wealthy man, and so he freely allowed Ruth to gather in his field. And this provided a great abundance for Ruth and Naomi. It provided them with food so that they could live. While Boaz extended an abundance of grace to Ruth, Naomi understood a greater potential existed here. So in a bold move, Naomi instructed Ruth to pursue Boaz, if you will. Go ahead and read Ruth chapter 3, and you can get all the juicy details there. Boaz ultimately married Ruth, and Ruth went on to give birth to a son named Obed, who would become the grandfather of one of the most famous kings in the history of Israel, that is King David. So we can learn a lot from Ruth and Boaz's story. Each of their actions display how we can share God's love with those who need it the most. Boaz was a man of great wealth who used his status to help Ruth and Naomi. Ruth was a virtuous woman who remained loyal to Naomi, who was used by God to advance his kingdom through being a part of King David's lineage. So today I encourage you to look out for God's calling on your life and how he's leading you to be a blessing to others. For not only will you bless those and minister to them, but God may also allow that to be a tremendous blessing unto you. God bless you.